Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good, Scott. How about you?
Good.
Are we the only ones here?
I'm letting some in as we speak. Steve,
Hello, how are you?
good, how are you?
Good, how's it going?
It's going well. How about you?
You know what? Busy with meetings today, but I had to rush back home. I was gonna stop over to BOCES and sign some papers for Deb Kimball, but I was so far behind because of the county taking longer today. I ran home and got to my computer, so here we are.
We appreciate that.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. They might need to borrow Tom Dorr to go over there and look at what to do about financing that the Nexus Center. They're at a snag.
Are they?
Yeah, what they did was, Tom, is that the project's going to cost $59 million, and the county secured $22 million from the state. So the audit authority has to come up with the other $27 million, and they knew it. They didn't go out the bond. And then, so what ends up happening is they were supposed to have it all done last year, and then maybe by January. And then in March hit and COVID hit, they didn't go out and bond. So now the state won't release their 22 million, all of their 22 million, until there's a bonded project. And the audit authority is looking at the county saying, hey, you need to bail us out here because, you know, we need to pay the contractors. So now they're sending the contractors to talk to us, and the contractors were by Zoom or by conference at the meeting today saying, hey, we need to get paid. And they haven't gotten paid from the audit authority because the audit authority never went and bonded. And they've been paid some of it, but it's a mess.
It sounds it. They need good bonding people.
That's right. That's right.
Fiscal advisors.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully they figure it all out.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi,
Hey, Elaine.
how you doing, guys?
Good, thank you.
Good. So Elaine, you're home. You're not in Florida. Where are you? You're home, right?
No, I'm home and I'm done with my 2-week quarantine after you come home and all that stuff. Because of my age, they called me every day for 14 days.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
3 famous questions, you know, do you feel sick? Do you have a temperature? Do you whatever?
Now you drove down and back, right?
No, I flew.
Oh, you flew. Okay.
Yeah, I flew. And it was fine. I thought it was very, very safe and well taken care of and clean. And I was a little frightened to go, but that was fine. The worst problem was coming home and being home at 6 minutes after 12 every day when they called. That's when they called, 6 minutes after 12.
You were on the list.
Not in the list, yeah.
Who called? Someone from the county?
Somebody from, I think it's from the state.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now my son went down. He just went for a few days. And when he came home, they just called him initially once. Of course, that's because he's young. And I'm, you know.
Not as young as him, that's all.
That's all. That's right.
That's all.
Young, old enough to be his mother.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to take a second to point something out on the agenda before our meeting officially begins. And Elaine, it will involve you.
Yeah.
I noticed that in our agenda, in the communications, oh no, you start with the review of the audit committee meeting. Nope, there's no problem. I missed the first page.
I think that's.
Yep, it's right here. So I said all of that so gracefully for no reason at all. All I had to do was just move a page forward. Can whoever is Marissa Cardillo's?
That is.
I think that's Mr. Nelson.
Oh, okay,
That
okay.
Mr. Nelson?
I think.
Really?
Or no, maybe.
No, it's Nicotera.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Tony, is that you down there on Marissa Cardillo's sign in?
I just asked him to.
Okay.
Well, he's on mute.
Okay. Well, maybe he's stepped out for a moment. We'll come back in and check on that.
Can you hear me now?
We can. I just want to make sure that was you. Tony, is that you?
Yes, it is, dear.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So just an FYI, everybody, we are streaming live on YouTube.
We're being recorded, right?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Mr. Salerno,
Yeah,
how are you?
I want to know who that bald-headed guy is up there in the corner.
Well, we have some other ones around that are getting
Yeah,
there.
more than
Don't
one.
worry about it.
He looks
I
older
think that
than
was you,
me.
Tom.
I figured it was me. I don't know where I am on.
Hey, Tommy.
John, how are you?
How you doing?
I'm well. How about you?
Oh, not bad, not bad. How's your grandkids?
Been well. Been very busy, but well.
Oh, yeah? Hey, I thought you'd be down south playing golf.
I spent the day chasing 2 5-year-olds and remote learning.
Greetings.
Michael,
Michael?
Yep, greetings.
you look very comfortable.
Oh, I am. It's beautiful out there today.
It is. Good part of the day tomorrow, I think, too.
Hello, Elaine.
Hi, Mike.
I like how the doorbell rings when people come in. There's Russ. Mrs. Turner.
Mr. Boucher,
Yes, sir.
how is Mr. Ballard? I haven't seen him as of late.
You know, I don't see him. I haven't seen him much lately. He's been well. I see his son a little bit. I saw his son today, and I asked his son how he's doing and how he's been. He said he's well. And oddly, this is going to sound funny. He said that Pete's been singing at a lot of funerals. So I said, well, that's not good. So, but he's
Leave
been-
it to him. He needs to be busy.
Yeah, he sure does. He sure does. So,
When you see him, please tell him I asked about him.
I will. I will. I will. Yeah. Pete's my partner in crime half the time, but we haven't been able to get in any trouble since COVID's been going on.
So Dr. Kilburn, if you're looking for a retirement plan, obviously Mr. Boucher, just the person you're talking about is a music teacher, ex-music teacher, retired. He's singing at funerals. There you go. You have a plan.
And it doesn't surprise me, does it?
I was a trombone player, so I'll just play trombone at funerals. I'm sure many people will want that.
Now wait a minute. You still play? Do you still have the trombone? Because we need musicians for our community band up in Remsen quite often.
So I have to tell you, I do still have the trombone. It's pretty dusty. I haven't actually played it in, I think I'm going into double digits now, unfortunately. I do enjoy playing too, but no
That's
time.
perfect. You'd fit right in then. You'd be good.
So Deb, I'm running through attendance and I'm looking for Charlene. I think Michelle indicated she's not able to attend, and also Doreen.
Correct.
Okay.
Would you like me to call her?
Yeah, if you're able to, that would be great. We certainly have a quorum, so I think at the board's discretion, they could start the meeting and then Charlene can join us if she can, and if she can't, we understand and we'll catch up. Oh, Elaine has a phone call. Or someone does. Maybe it's not Elaine.
Let's get on with the show.
You ready?
Yep.
All right, let's call this meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We'll move boldly into recognition, and I see none. So then we're going to go on to recognition of visitors. This is a closed meeting due to COVID, but the meeting is being recorded. So folks, if you to know that, and it's being broadcasted live on YouTube, I believe, right? Okay. And then we go on to communications, in which we'll have a review from the audit committee. So you want to take over, Dr. Kilburn?
Actually, I'm going to turn this right over to the chair, and that would be Elaine Salvo.
Perfect.
Oh, Elaine, you're muted.
You had sent with your packet another packet with the charge $9 per packet that was sent out to us, and with the audit report from Amy, the auditor at Weston Company. She met with the audit committee on October 1st and reviewed the audit in its entirety with us. I don't think that there's any need, unless anyone has any specific questions, to go over all the numbers and all those things that were in there. They did audit the federal funds, our general fund, our capital project fund, and also our grants, which they do every year. Everything was in line. It appears like we are doing what we need to do. We're posting correctly. And the numbers looked very good for us, but we have to remember that that's because of what happened this year, and that we didn't use some of the funds that we had when we closed down in March. However, that makes next year probably much more difficult. So we can't really, take any rah-rahs about the fact that the numbers look like we were in better shape than we have been in other years. It is recommended by them and the audit committee that we accept this audit. But before we do that, I'd like Tom to talk to us a little bit. There were two findings that they asked that we look at and give a plan of correction for, and the board has to accept the plan of correction. So I'm going to ask Tom if he would do those. One was the over-accrued TRS liability, and another was about some internal controls that needed to be cleaned up.
I get used to this muting and unmuting. Yeah, there were the two findings that Elaine pointed out. The first one was an overaccrual on our teacher retirement system. And the reason for that is, as you know, you're going to approve budget parameters tonight. We won't know the rates until quite some time. So we try to be conservative and estimate as best we can. We only in this past August got the current year's rates. So it's we're always kind of speculative. But one thing I did notice in my absence, the board did establish a teacher's retirement reserve, which has been allowed now. It wasn't allowed for a number of years. And the auditors were happy that we can now, during the course of the year, not wait until after the year is closed, but as we see if we have any type of overaccrual, we could try to fund the TRS reserve with those monies. Now, we're pretty conservative this year in the budget parameters that are going out, so I don't think there'll be a lot of money, but we try to keep it within maybe 1% of where we were the previous year, based on, again, the estimates that they've given us and the history. Obviously, that the TRS fund itself relies a lot on the stock market, which is pretty volatile at this point, but still creeping upward. So they should be, the TRS is in excellent shape. If you, again, not to be too long about this, but in the audit, we actually had a surplus. There's a calculation that's in there that we have to assume a liability if the state retirement systems are underfunded, and we get to have an asset if they're overfunded. Well, TRS is actually overfunded at this point actuarially, so we have a quote asset on our books as a result of that. But it always makes good sense to plan for the long range, and we will put we could put, as the year goes on, we could put the money that, if there's any money over accrued, we could put it into the TRS reserve.
So
On
then,
board it.
Tom, we can bank the money and then it won't show on our books as an
An over accrual.
Right,
Rather than just accrue it and say, okay, we
Right.
basically charge the programs this extra money, we can move it over to the reserve
okay.
if the board so desires, and we can see how the year goes. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a very interesting year. So we'll try to stay on top of that.
Okay, so that, and your answer is going into the state for the answer of the audit, right? And then number 2, we had some internal things that just needed to be cleaned up a little bit.
It was more as a result of the single audit. The single audit looks at federal funds. Our biggest federal program is the school lunch fund. So there are a couple of things that she recognized there. And there are things we probably were doing, but they want us to establish, the board to establish procedures. We're supposed to check and make sure that the vendors that we're dealing with are not on a not to be used list, for one thing. They would also like a second set of eyes on the free and reduced lunch approvals. And there were 2 other things that were, again, mostly looking at lists and making sure that the vendors that we're dealing with are okay to be dealt with.
Okay,
So
now,
it's four different things that were just related to that. I'll get a set of procedures out to the board to approve, and they're more looking for the procedures, then obviously we will follow the procedures once you put them in place.
okay, then this is something that in the first item, we do have a reserve for those funds. And with this, we do have to establish a policy or procedure. And you will
Procedures,
get that to us to do. All right.
Yes.
So then on our consent agenda is a motion to accept the audit. And with that, we are approving what Tom is sending in as our reply to the audit. I think that's it, if anyone has any questions.
I did have a, oh,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. I just did have a quick comment to add. In addition, when we had asked Amy from Weston Company when she was going to be doing the school lunch audit, to also just on our behalf look into the farm to table. If you remember last year, we had received a reduction in funds according to the invoices on purchase orders not indicating made in New York State. So she did go through that and she says we're well positioned. She felt that we were doing things right at the BOCES, and she helped make changes to the invoices to ensure that we could meet those requirements moving forward. So that felt good. It was nice to hear, and it was just a little aside.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, can move on.
All right. So we move on now to the review for the budget guidelines.
I'm going to turn that over to Tom Dorr. As you know, Tom put in your packets the budgetary guidelines set forth for the following year. You'll notice some reductions in increases based in parameters from the previous year to this year. And Tom, I don't know if you just want to speak to it briefly and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, and the budget is just that. It's a plan at this point. As I stated earlier, it's going to be a pretty interesting year when we look forward to the revenue stream coming out of Albany, how it affects our districts. So I think this is a good starting point. We're trying to be as tight as we can and still be realistic about, you know, the costs that we have that we really don't have a lot of control over, which would be, you know, the retirement systems and health insurance. Those are our 2 big expenses just up there in the district. But it's a starting point, and we will get going on it. But I think the word is, I've already had discussions with Dr. Kilburn, and we're going to try to be as tight as we can. We're going to talk to the superintendent, see where they're at, and try to react to what they need from us as we spend the next few months putting this together.
Tom, on our workers' comp, do we bid that out as part of our insurance?
No, it's a consortium. So
Okay.
it's self-funded.
Okay, all right, it's self-funded. So these, okay. And these are real numbers.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yep.
Hey, Tom. Gary.
Gary.
It looks like you're still planning on overfunding the retirement reserves or the retirement funds.
It looks like
You
we're
know.
planning on overfunding it.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
if you
as I said,
over last year, your numbers are about the same. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that that's the plan.
Well, we went at 10 and a quarter last year. Last
Yep.
year we went at 10 and a quarter, and the actual rate, as it turned out from TRS, was 9.53. So I felt comfortable getting it down 0.25%, but there's still some volatility.
Sure.
Now we're less than 0.5% away from 2021's actual rate. So.
Okay.
But we should have enough in there if we.
Oh yeah, I hope so. You know, I mean, and that's back to the reserve. Once you start getting money into the TRS reserve, you can even be tighter on this.
Mhm.
You know, you could
Right.
and so years going down the road, if we were able to over a long term put aside $1 million,
Yeah.
that'll make you get tighter to that number, you know, that we're guessing at. So, because it is a guess at this point, and the market has a big impact on it.
So Tom, if the market shifts dramatically, it's Steve Boucher. If the
Yep.
market shifts dramatically, then we'd have to find some funding, right? Because I can remember being on the local school board in Remsen in 2008, the stock market went from 14,000 to 6,000. And we had to come up with an extra $500,000 from the taxpayers to keep the TRS whole. So if the stock market does take a big dip, that's something we'll have to find money for, right? We'll have to address somehow, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they're going to want their money no matter what. So that's why, again, the reserve, I'm so glad to see the reserves allowable and you've established it. Now we just got to start funding it. So
Right.
those situations won't destroy us when they come.
Right, right.
But Tom, there was a change, wasn't there, from an average of 5 years on the retirement? I think in 2008 that wasn't instituted yet.
That might be, you're probably right, Russ. They're a little more as far, and they're dropping. I know TRS is dropping their assumption rates. You know, they were always kind of liberal, and they've been dropping it even more so than ERS as far as their rate of return that they're projecting long term. So they're getting better at it, and there are some little more some checks on it so that it shouldn't be as volatile as 2008.
I would agree.
That's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Hey, Tom, it's John. How much money did the school districts lose with this virus? Was it 20%?
I think that's what they're talking about holding. I mean, it's not gone. Everybody's still praying for, you know, the feds to come in and bail everybody out, but the governor has projected that they'll hold back, you know, up to 20% this year. And 21, 22 is anybody's bet.
That's his way of getting money from the feds. I mean, realistically.
He says we got a $65 billion shortfall projected. That's
Yeah.
that's a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So are there more questions about Dr. Kilburn and Tom? Are there more questions about the budget guidelines? The budget? No. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the capital project report, Dr. Kilburn.
So John Salerno is the chair of that committee, and we have some minutes on the capital project report. John, did you want to ask any questions or make any comments to the minutes?
No, I thought that we were good.
Okay. With that in mind, you know, we're looking to enter into a project that wraps up remainder windows and begins some work on some doors. We're looking at money that we currently have, but we do have to submit to a new project to New York State. And there might be some scale back in the scope of the project depending on how bids might come in. Were there any questions about the minutes from that committee?
No, I haven't seen anything wrong with them.
Okay. So I think we're good with the capital project committee report.
Okay. Then we go on to from the floor, Doctor.
Yep, that would be if there are any comments from the floor.
From the floor or correspondence. I guess we go down right on to correspondence.
There's none.
We're moving right along here. All right. with no further ado, we move on to the district superintendent's report. You're back
Yes.
on.
Thank you. So I'll begin actually with a note about this agenda I want to bring to our attention. I had put in our blue memo that the policy board at Madison, our attorney Dave Pello, might be joining us for this meeting to provide some professional development regarding policy 7201, which regards the educational report of abuse in an educational setting. So Dave and the policy board went back to review the policy from the perspective of the language about board members' responsibility to the policy. He called me this afternoon and said he'd actually like us to pull it. Though it was previously reviewed by our committee and Dave was a part of that, it wasn't looked at from that perspective. And he thinks that the board's requirements under this policy are actually quite narrow, but when you read the policy, it doesn't read that way. So he's asking that that be pulled. I'd like to make that recommendation because the policy board, the Madison Oneida Group, would like to restructure that policy and resubmit it to our policy committee for board approval, most likely in December. So if the board's amenable to that, when Mr. Boucher, when it turns back over to him, there might be a motion from someone on the board to consider tabling policy 7201 and moving forward. So I just want to bring that matter to your attention for later this evening. Tonight in the district superintendent report, I'd like to talk about 3 things. 1, the board retreat. 2, give you an update about all things COVID-19 and schools. And 3, provide a technology presentation that our senior council has put together for you that I think is going to be, well, good to talk about right now, certainly timely. So regarding the retreat, first of all, I want to thank everyone for their understanding of our need to postpone our retreat due to navigating our COVID contact tracing for the first time. We learned a lot from that, and I'll share some of that tonight. In response to moving forward with the retreat and really trying to solicit great feedback from you as individual board members, but also to better understand the school circumstances now, both our organizations and the component districts, and also what the perspectives of our superintendents are on BOCES services and what might be needed in the future. Ann Turner and I did some brainstorming. And Ann is wonderful. I have to say that she's just a gem with her thoughts and approaches to options that we might have in terms of retreats and professional development. And the idea came up to perhaps conduct a thought exchange. Now, a thought exchange is an opportunity where you would log in online, you'd get a link like an email, and you'd click it open, and it would show a presentation that would be put together for you, like a PowerPoint that's narrated, and it would have follow-up questions that you could answer. And what's interesting is you'd also have the opportunity to react to other people's contributions of thought. Now, what we're thinking is that the board would participate in the thought exchange. So, for example, Elaine could do that on her own time at home. Steve could do that on his own time. And then we'd also share that thought exchange process with our cabinet. So that's our superintendents. So they too could provide some great feedback about where BOCES is now, where component schools are now, and where they think things should head in the future. And within our BOCES organization, we could also share that thought exchange with our supervisors. Now, the idea would be that if we could collect this data in October and maybe into early November, then Ann could come back through and analyze that data, come up with themes, and then in either the November or December board meeting, share out the key findings from the thought exchange. The board could then participate in discussion around some of those themes right in board session. And we could set a date for a retreat meeting to continue that work later on, like let's say in January. Now, in the research about the conversation of what are we going to do now as a BOCES and for components and how might that affect the future, a few themes have come up. What's going to happen fiscally to schools? And as a result, what will that mean for BOCES? What will we need to do differently to support our component districts fiscally? As Tom was just mentioning, we're into some pretty dire circumstances and potentially getting worse. What might we want to consider in terms of teaching and learning? So as you've been hearing, how we teach and how students are learning is changing as a result of COVID. What might that mean now, and what might that mean in the future? What about the social and emotional well-being of our students, but also in the now moment of everyone else too, who's experiencing significant stress within the pandemic, for sure. And then what is equity? What role does equity play? You're going to learn a little bit about digital equity today, but also we've also been discussing racial equity. And we have equity in terms of inclusion and belongingness and how different programs might affect different student populations. So those are 4 lenses that we would like to put together the thought exchange in, to really focus on those 4 areas and get multiple perspectives. And so we propose that the first half of the board retreat be a virtual retreat through presentation and thought exchange, with follow-up in a live board meeting, and then a set the date for perhaps January to see if we can pull off an in-person meeting to continue our work. So with that in mind, I'd like to open up for discussion and see how the board feels about that idea.
Are you saying that Anne would develop something, am I muted? No, I'm not. That Anne would develop something, some points for us to focus on and give our thoughts on?
Correct. So it would be like watching a video, that would go through different slides, and then you'd have a series of questions to respond to.
Right, so she would pick our brain. With
Exactly, virtually.
what she gave.
Virtual brain picking.
And we could do this at our own individual time.
You can, and yet you can also contribute to each other's thoughts.
So she gives us access to all 4 of the workshops after they come out.
So what would happen is we would put together a narrative, like a slideshow that, you would hit play and watch as a video. You would have a series of questions to answer surrounding those themes of finances, equity, social emotional learning, and teaching and learning. And then that same process that you go through, where you're watching a video and answering questions, we would share that same process, let's say, with the superintendents, and ask them to participate, with our own staff and ask them to participate. And then we'd bring all of the data from that back to the board. So you can have an understanding of how that was supported with, how did it look from the board members' perspectives? What did you all feel and believe? But then what did the superintendents and our own supervisors feel and believe also?
Then we would see where we land as
Correct,
an
you would see where you land.
organization and a group and all the districts, right? And then have a retreat to plan our goals
step.
and such.
Yes.
It'd be quite interesting to see, our perspective, or my perspective, compared to district's perspectives.
Mhm.
It's interesting. Sometimes you think you know what you need or want, but you may not.
Right. Good point. Any other thoughts?
I really like the idea. The question is the retreat, you said you're going to do this virtually, but is the retreat in person or virtual also?
Well, I think, we've had some discussion about that. There's been a desire to meet in person if possible, but that would probably be January. If we find out, if we're shut down or we're not able to accommodate an in-person meeting, then of course we could work on virtual collaborations using Zoom. I had the pleasure of attending professional development for 2 days via Zoom, and I thought, what is this going to be like? It was actually really neat. The facilitator put us in groups to talk to each other. We were able to watch different slideshow presentations. We were able to accomplish a lot. So I think we can proactively set a retreat date for January with a plan for it to be in person, but with the reality that it may end up being virtual if it needs to be.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on us going back to normal in January.
Yeah.
I think that's a long shot.
I question the reality of in person, just because I'm seeing so many different circumstances happen regionally with COVID. I think you're not off the mark, Gary, but none of us also have crystal balls.
See, I disagree. I think we'll be able to go back. But I think this early work is going to give us an agenda and a real focus, and not sit down, whether it's virtually or in a meeting, and have to think and toss back and forth, and who talks and who doesn't talk, and so forth and so on.
So
Yvonne has a question.
Yvonne's got her hand
Yeah,
up.
I've had enough Zoom meetings that I know to do this. In our agency, we have like over 300 employees and we use Zoom. And I like Zoom because you can break out into different groups. So if we
Yeah.
can't come back, if we break out into groups and talk about things, you know, together, I think that works out good because then when we come back as a whole, you can see what everyone else has talked about instead of a bunch of people trying to talk at once. You have 3-4 people in a group and then someone talks about it. Their spokesperson will talk to the rest of the group about what was discussed. And I think we should go that way. I'm happy we're doing these because yeah, this virus really has me nervous. Steve knows that. It's like I'm masked down and I do social distancing. So I like this because I can focus more. I mean, I miss you guys, some of you anyway. No, I miss you guys. But I need to be able to focus on what we're doing without worrying about if someone sniffles and they have allergies or whatever. I know I went off on a tangent, but this works for me.
Good.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a good first step in place. We'll be working on the thought exchange and you'll be receiving an email and I'll update you in that process so we can begin to initiate the virtual retreat portion. Okay, COVID board update. I thought I would take a minute to just fill you in on COVID. So a few things. Today was an exciting day at OHM BOCES. This morning at like 7 something, I got a love letter from the Department of Health and it said, "Dear Trish and all other BOCES district superintendents, we, the Department of Health, love BOCES and we want to make sure you're also included in reporting your positive COVID cases every day to the New York State Department of Health." I was so thrilled to receive the message. Further with, there'll be a webinar about how to do this at 11 a.m. today, and you'll be expected to report at 4 p.m. today. Everything we need to know. So it made for a very interesting day for many of us here at BOCES. So New York State schools, both public and private across the state, have had to report on a daily basis different data about COVID as it relates to student and staff. For example, data about all the people who are enrolled to attend the programs at the schools versus all the people who actually show up. Who was tested that we know of, who may be positive that we know of, things like that. There are complexities to a BOCES, and that is why the Department of Health held off on BOCES for a while, because they're trying to figure things out like, how do we report programs when children spend half their day at a school district and then half their day with a BOCES? And if that child becomes COVID positive, will they be reported both by the BOCES and by the school district? Then it looks like there's 2 COVID positive children when there's only 1. So they gave us guidance today, and it is interesting guidance. For example, in this example I just gave, we will have to double report students. So if there's a student, let's say a Utica student, who attends career and technical education, and they have a COVID diagnosis, Utica has to report to the dashboard that a Utica student has a COVID positive test. OHM BOCES also has to report that same student. Now, we don't use names, but to parents and families, that might look like there's more COVID positive cases than there really are. But they did explain to us some of the reasoning behind it. Right now, contact tracing and COVID testing is not a universally linked process across the state. What that means is I might not be feeling well, and I might go to a testing site that reports directly to the Department of Health. So they know Trish Kilburn test positive for COVID. But I'm going to pick on Deb Kimball. Deb Kimball goes to a different site, and that site doesn't communicate directly with Department of Health automatically. So the BOCES, as Deb's employers, might know before the Department of Health would that Deb has tested positive, because Deb might call and say, "Hey, Trish, I just want you to know I was tested positively." So in an effort to just help coordination, they're asking the schools to do their part to report as much as they know up to the dashboard so that the Department of Health can try to track and better understand how COVID is taking place across a region. So in a way, they kind of do want redundancies. They'd rather have over-reporting than under-reporting. They are looking to try to create better universal linkage systems, But while those are being built, this is the part they're asking us to do. It makes sense. It's some additional steps. So that was an exciting day for us today. We were able to push out some emails to our supervisors to get some information quickly up into the dashboard to make the deadline today at 4. And then we are going to streamline a process now that we know the types of information that they're asking of a BOCES and how that's a little bit different than information they might be asking of school districts. So that was the latest and greatest from the State Department of Health today. At the end of last week and earlier this week, the governor's latest and greatest had to do with shutting down some schools across the state of New York who have COVID clusters or COVID hotspots. He's implemented a system that designates schools as being, or regions being red, fully closed down, orange, and then yellow, which is allowed to reopen. And there are rules about whether the schools have to be in fully remote or open related to the infection rate of that particular cluster or hotspot. But he also included rules about testing of students, saying that in a COVID cluster, if you are identified as a yellow school, which means that you're able to return to in-person instruction, 20% of attendees for in-person instruction, both students and staff, have to be tested for COVID. Now, you'll hear the governor say the schools have to do the tests. The clarification is that the schools have to coordinate with the departments of health or the counties. In some cases, schools may be able to do the testing. That would be very unique because schools by themselves are not diagnosticians. In most cases, schools will be working with their local counties. That, of course, has created a conundrum for counties who are like us, finding out a lot about this at the last minute and trying to figure out heads or tails. So we're continuing to learn more, but if we enter into that phase, if we have COVID increases, we'll know that that's an expectation. He has rapid testing systems that kits and personnel and people who are trained that he pushes out to those regions of the state to assist with testing. But that does not currently apply to us. Additionally, the Department of Health put out COVID flowcharts. I'm wondering if I have one on hand. I feel like I do. I feel like I just used one a second ago for an employee. Well, I must have put it down. So the New York State Department of Health released what they're calling the COVID-19 toolkit. And it's a flowchart. It's a series of pages with flowcharts about, can my child come to school today? Can I, the employee, come to school today? Do I need to go get a COVID test? And it reads just like a chart. So it's like you start here like in a maze and it will say, you know, have you tested positive for COVID or been exposed to anybody? No. Okay. Are you symptomatic? No. Have you traveled to a place? No. Or yes, if you've traveled, where? This is what you do. Or if you're symptomatic, now you need to go to a doctor. If you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you a test, this is where you go next. If you go to the doctor and the doctor says you don't have COVID, you have strep throat, this is what you do. If you go to the doctor, but the doctor doesn't see you and tells you to go get a COVID test, this is what you do. So the charts really, you just have to read through them step by step for each employee in their particular case or for each student. There's a little bit of convolution just because it's new. It's a new system. Everyone's trying to learn. It has had some potential impact on employees. For example, previous to this toolkit, New York State school employees were deemed to be essential, which meant that we, the employer, would be able to make decisions as to who would be able to work on our campus in person or who might not be able to. That decision has been undone, and the Department of Health has decreed that now school employees are not essential. The impact is that in cases where a person has been exposed or has traveled or is symptomatic, they can't get a negative COVID test, and then the employer can't make the distinctive decision as to whether or not to return you to work. Now everyone is on a blanket quarantine in such cases. That certainly raises some flags when we consider travel, right? People go on trips, we have to consider that now. So we put a memo out to our employees about that. Another instance is that when people do become symptomatic, I have a runny nose and I'm running a temperature and I'm pretty sure it's just a cold, or I have a chronic allergies. Now you can't come into the workplace and you may have to stay home for up to 10 days, depending on how you fall within the flow charts. So there could be impact to the number of in-person professionals and support staff that we have in our buildings at any one time, and there's no predicting that. So we're just going to keep walking through the process. However, to another point, we are meeting with all of the Oneida County superintendents, and I've also invited in Oneida County private schools and charters at the request of the Department of Health to meet tomorrow via Zoom. So our local Department of Health, they're really trying their best and doing a great job, on our county executive. They've been great about meeting with us regularly, and we've coordinated another meeting where school leaders can ask questions directly of both the county executive and the Department of Health to better understand the flow charts and everything else COVID as it relates to schools. So should there be more that you need to know, I'll be sure to fill you in the future. Any questions about that? Okay,
Yeah.
very exciting stuff. Oh, I heard a question.
Where'd the flow charts come from? Did the state develop them, or did the county develop? Who developed the flow charts? Because that sounds like a useful tool.
I had them right here, clicked in here the whole time. The states were, these were developed by the New York State Department of Health, and it's called the Pre-K to Grade 12 COVID Toolkit. And it's the State Department of Health that changed employees to being essential or non-essential. But if you look, I'll just kind of put it up in the camera, you can kind of see. You see how it's just a flow chart? It just starts like you start here and you simply move your way through the arrows to figure out if you can go to work or go to school or what your next steps are. So it's interesting, but it will take some guidance to get through it. And locally, as our schools are managing COVID more directly, we're sharing with each other pretty regularly what we're learning, what our experiences are with contact tracing, what our experiences are with different testing sites, and how to support each other with information as fast as we can. It does change a little bit. Everyone's COVID experiences are different. A lot of it has to do with the different county departments of health and contact tracers we're all working with. Sometimes it's the state, sometimes it's Oneida County, sometimes it's Herkimer or Madison counties. But everybody is really doing their best to work together, and I'm proud of all parties' work. It's tricky stuff.
Yeah, it is. Did you say that now the state moved teachers from being essential to non-essential?
Correct.
How's that?
No, not just teachers, all school employees. So,
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it does raise some concerns. For example, I don't want to panic Scott Morris or anyone else when I give this example, but in the past, let's say we had an employee who maybe traveled, right? Or may have potentially been exposed to COVID, but they test negative and they're symptom free. We might have been able to bring them in for essential functions. So for example, let's say they're like imagine there's like a computer genius who operates our entire computer network, our infrastructure, right? We might have been able to still have them come in so that if something went wrong, we could bring an employee back. That's questionable now as to whether or not we'll be allowed to do that. So one of the next steps for us in our meeting tomorrow is to navigate what is the impact of saying that all of our employees are no longer essential. If we have systems operations physically, like plumbing and heating, right, need to function. If those break, what will be the plans? Now, truthfully, there are other options that we might be able to make work. We might have relationships with vendors who would come in. So we might have computer company that could come in and help us if we're not able to bring an employee in that's supposed to do that work. Or maybe there's an agreement we can have with another BOCES to support us with technology or with operations and maintenance. So we internally have been really looking at the impact of this and the impact of quarantines on our essential functions. For example, what would happen if our central business office, if everybody in that office went on a quarantine? And how can we make sure that we can function in spite of that? So some things we're putting through the district are rotations of remote work and in-person work. So in some situations where we know there are essential functions that must continue, we might ask for some employees to work across from each other, meaning they never really see each other in person. We split them up and we say, you guys are going to come in person on Monday, Wednesdays. The other ones come in person on Tuesday, Thursdays, or something along that line, so that if someone's exposed to COVID, it doesn't knock out a whole department. We're looking at staggered schedules in situations. We're looking at also simultaneous locations. So we've split some work groups up and put them, let's say, on different floors of a building so that even though they're working simultaneously, they're not in contact with each other. So that's kind of been some of the impact that we've had to look at recently regarding COVID, and also as it relates to essential workers and essential functions. Russ? Yeah.
Yeah, I just got back from North Carolina working, and so I'm on quarantine, and it's 14 days. And I asked that specific question in regard to testing. If I go out 5 days in on my 14-day quarantine and it's negative, I'm still quarantined.
Yep.
That test will not relinquish the 14 days.
Correct.
I mean, that, you know, they call me every day and text me twice a day to make sure that I'm home. But yeah, so the test, and they don't want you to go out to get the test.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's my reality. So.
Yeah. And I will say that is the shift, right? So now that school employees are not essential, to Russ's point, everyone has to quarantine. You could get a test every day if you wanted to, but it's really important that we stay home. So for us, it's a shift in mindset, but it's not an obstacle that cannot be overcome. All right, so I'm going to keep moving on to the last fabulous portion of the district superintendent's update, which is the senior council. We're going to be hearing from Scott Morris, Ann Turner, and Chris Hill, not to exclude Tom Dorr from the amazing senior council, but this is about technology and oh, wait a minute, sorry. My computer is trying to download something while I'm in a meeting. Not to exclude Tom Dorr, he is amazing. I want to point that out, but we're going to focus on technology, professional development, and instruction for this. And I'm going to turn it over to Ann Turner. Scott, you are hosting, so you're sharing the screen, correct? Okay, Ann, have at it.
Share it now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kilburn. So good afternoon or good evening, everyone. The Senior Council is going to take you on a tour of a house that Mr. Morris will be putting up on the screen to share. I believe you can see it now. But before we begin that, I'm going to ask that you take a look back or think back 10 years to 2010. And I'm going to ask you to consider, what does school look like? What did it look like in a school in 2010? So my memory of that is that you probably would see rows of desks. You would probably see the teacher in the front of the room. You would probably see hardbound textbooks and a bell schedule. And that's pretty much how learning and instruction had looked for many years before 2010. So it was at that point that the OHM BOCES board and the administration took a look at what the school environment could become. The graphic on your screen represents the long-term and the short-term goals that have enabled not only OHM BOCES, but also all of our component districts to meet the emerging needs in the areas of technology and instruction. We selected this example to highlight our ability to forecast a need, set a goal, and provide the support necessary to assure our students in the region are learning, whether it be online or in a brick and mortar school. As you will see, this vision, this goal, as well as the level of preparedness districts and BOCES currently have to meet today's virtual instruction needs, did not occur overnight. As you'll note on the side of the graphic, it may actually be covered up by the people, but up the side of the graphic, you will notice that it has been achieved over a period of time that covers several years. This plan is the result of a direction set by the OHM BOCES board, that being to meet the emerging needs of the districts, as well as years of planning and implementation by the Information and Technology Division and the cooperation and support of all the BOCES divisions. The construction of this goal, the building of the plan to position all of our districts and BOCES to be prepared for this moment, to assure that our students in the region can continue learning in a pandemic, all began 10 years ago. So to put some context, for me, I recall that I was still the superintendent in Remsen 10 years ago. And that's when we began to talk about our long-range technology plan with our board. And we began the process of upgrading our infrastructure. So for me, I am really excited to see that 10 years after those discussions, we continue to look at the future of technology, of working together to provide innovations for our learners in the world we know that they will face tomorrow. So with that, I am going to ask Mr. Morris to start us off on the steps to the building.
Thank you, Mrs. Turner. It's funny when you think about 10 years ago, I'm thinking about running around hanging smart boards and projectors, trying to make sure that the computers, that the teacher's computer could play a video, right? The internet connections of the buildings were slow. The infrastructure in all of these buildings couldn't facilitate that. And when you look at that document, boy, we've come a long way in 10 years. But we've also had some help, right? So, you know, schools understood the need, right, to increase capacity, increase bandwidth, and certainly make a move towards digital delivery models. We also had help with funding sources. So, prior to E-rate and Smart Bond, really any infrastructure projects done in schools were the district, had to front the money for those expenses. Once E-rate and Smart Bond came in play, these are federal and state programs to provide schools with money for infrastructure equipment as well as devices. We worked, and Tom, I think back when you were here last time, you allowed me to sit with the business officials to start talking about E-rate 6-7 years ago and how that could benefit those schools. So when I say we, our team down here has worked with all 12 components to best leverage those dollars and to improve infrastructure over the last 10 years. And obviously, when you look at main campus, right, the data center that exists at main campus, that wasn't here 10 years ago either. And that's a result of a lot of the work that's gone in with these component school districts. So as I look at that chart, you could walk in a classroom today and you might see a smart board and projector, but I can tell you all the back end infrastructure and all the connectivity to those buildings has changed dramatically. Mr. Hill.
All right, so what Scott has started to talk about was that foundation, the steps that led to this 10 years ago. So that's, what I like to, when I look at this graphic, I consider that the foundation for the change that was ahead. So what I'm going to start talking about is what you see in the middle of the screen, and those are the 4 pillars. So the 4 pillars of this building are really when we started to see change begin to happen. The most important pillar in there is clearly professional learning. And for our organization, that means professional learning that comes from Ann Turner's division, where the professional learning is about curriculum and instruction. It's the professional learning that comes from IT and Scott Morris's division, where that is centered around the use of technology and the use of different software. And then the BOCES in and of itself, the instructional services programs have really served to be an incubator, a place to experiment and try a lot of these new techniques. So that professional learning is really the key. And what we've seen over the last 5 years or so is that professional learning and professional development has really lent itself to the pillar that says technology infused curriculum and instruction. So, you know, Scott had mentioned 10 years ago, if you saw a teacher using a smart board, you thought they were on the cutting edge, right? But now we're talking about student devices, student facing, things like flipped classroom, and technology infused curriculum as opposed to just using it to deliver the old fashioned PowerPoint. So that was the second pillar when we started to see some change. At the same time, there's two pillars that were developments that happened outside of the BOCES, but we clearly jumped on and started to push. First being software development. So when Google Apps for Education came out, when Buzz started to get developed, and then we saw the beginnings of video conferencing, you know, we really as an organization, both to our components and internally, focused on reaping the benefits of those and pushing those forward. The last pillar that I'm going to ask Scott to jump in about was the emergence of the low-cost device. So years ago, it was an iPad, it was a PC, and they were expensive. But I'm going to let Scott talk about the emergence of the low-cost device and how that was a game changer.
Well, we go back 10 years and we were spending $1,000 a piece on a desktop and or laptop, right? And then the associated Microsoft licensing. So you're talking $1,500 just to put a device on a teacher's desk. What's happened with Google Apps for Education and the arrival of Chromebooks, that cost has gone from $1,500 down to, in some cases, $250, right? Combine the fact that the management system that comes with it, and it's free, is easy to deploy thousands of Chromebooks. You know, case in point, you know, Utica, I think this past year, we've got a total of 13,000 Chromebooks in the city district. Now, obviously that didn't start yesterday. That's been part of a smart bond plan that's going on for years. And that planning process is in all of our schools. Everybody's taking advantage of that to the extent to be able to, you know, acquire these low cost devices with the idea to put them in every kid's hands.
So with those four pillars that have, you know, started about 2015, about 5 years ago, we saw those four pillars of change, you know, really pushing the envelope along. We came into 2020 in a position of readiness, to a degree of readiness. So now when we start to look at the next level, excuse me, when you start to look at the next level is when we start to look at the word transformative, right? So now we're starting to talk about changes that are more than just changes that are transformative across the board. Now, mind you, this transformation, kind of like the caterpillar to a butterfly, not necessarily pain-free. Like it's a little bit messy, and we're all, you know, working very hard. It hasn't been a smooth one at all. But what we are seeing is transformative changes in delivery. So if you think about the delivery models, hybrid model, hybrid learning, remote learning, and even in-person learning, because in-person learning doesn't look like it used to. In-person learning, when I walk through and see in-person learning, we're talking with one-to-one devices in the classroom. So these are transformative delivery models that we didn't foresee 10 years ago and would not be possible without everything that we've talked about so far over time. You know, in the summertime, in August, we were able to stand up and build a virtual elementary school, 205 students, 12 teachers. We were able to build that in 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. We put that together. And again, it was a harried, crazy experiment, but completely impossible before all of this development that led to it. You know, we're seeing things. I put CTE up in here because the other day, in CTE, our conservation teacher tied a camera to his hard hat, put a Wi-Fi device in his pocket, and broadcast the students at home from the woods with a chainsaw in his hand and taught the lesson virtually from the woods. And that's the kind of thing we're seeing happening in all of our CTE classrooms and in classrooms out in district. P-TECH continues to be on the cutting edge of what they're doing with their delivery model, with more and more teachers going to the flipped classroom. We've had great results with our credit recovery program and MSA. Students that are a little bit disenfranchised with the school process, we're able to switch them over to credit recovery at home. We're getting good participation and good results. On the other side of what we do, teletherapy has emerged. So, starting in the spring, teletherapy was it was a reaction, right? That was the only thing we could do. Now it's becoming a tool. It's becoming a complementary tool, a way to reach certain kids that can't come in on certain days, or it may even be better for certain kids. And that's in social work, that's in PT, OT, speech, and all of those areas. The other thing that we're starting to see emerge is teaching and learning from home. As as Russ commented, he's on a quarantine. Well, we've had teachers on quarantines, for one reason or another, and more often than not, they're delivering instruction to their students that are in person and hybrid on their quarantines from home. And that's really a game changer. We're able to manage it personnel-wise, and it's really creating an opportunity for no disruption in learning. If you have a math teacher who's on a quarantine who's teaching Algebra 1, that's an issue, right? So it's been really transformative to be able to do that from home in these situations. The other thing we're seeing, and we saw glimpses of this years ago with PTEC, we're seeing kids that are asymptomatic in their home, just logging in and following the class, right? A Zoom meeting for one, and kids are able to log in and follow the class, or they're learning asynchronously and we're not losing as much time. So those are some of the transformative changes that we've seen since March 13th that are a result of 10 years of foundational buildup. Which leads me to the roof here. So the roof is, and I will say that these are, my brain's predictions, but some of the things that we could see in the future. So as a result of all of this, we definitely are preparing for that virtual academy to become a K through 12 model if it needs to be. I mean, we're not in the market of stealing students, but if it needs to be, we're ready for that to become a K-12 virtual school. I think we're going to see a version of substitute teaching 2.0 come along, and that's my term. But substitute teaching 2.0, we're having problems with substitute teachers all across the region leading up to this. Now we're starting to see some options. We're starting to see the ability, especially with the quality of asynchronous digital instruction. We're going to see some options coming up for possibly new ways to handle substitute teaching. Chronic absenteeism. There are a lot of barriers that keep kids from coming to school besides illness, right? So what we're seeing with the one-to-one devices and the ability to log into the classroom is we could see some ways to intervene in chronic absenteeism without students coming to school. We're also talking about permanent hybrid models. Space is an issue for us as an organization. It's an issue in many schools, and we're already talking about Middle Settlement Academy possibly creating a permanent hybrid model, which will allow us to serve more students in less space. And finally, all of this creates so much access for all students, access to school, access to different electives. And actually, Mrs. Turner had some thoughts that she wanted to share with us on increasing access for all. So I'm going to turn it back over to her.
Thank you. So when I think about increasing access for all and thinking about what's coming in the future, starting even with the state education department, you're seeing them start to loosen up some of the requirements for graduation, providing additional pathways for graduation. So what that's really doing is providing choice for our students. We talk a lot with teachers about choice, offering students choice in the classroom, not a one-size-fits-all approach anymore. So I see all of this work enabling that kind of choice and a very personalized learning experience for students, but not only for students, but also personalized professional learning for our educators. So I think all of that is just a continuing refinement of where we've been and where we're going to go.
So I just want to say I was able to meet with the senior council today and listen to them take me through this. And it was so exciting for me, especially new to the organization. And one thing that I think is clear in this organization is your belief in that part of the mission that talks to the emerging need and the innovation. You know, when you think about this, when you go back in time to 2010, I was talking about this, you know, as Scott said, if you were looking on the cutting edge, you were thinking about teachers with smart boards and projectors in their classrooms and maybe 1 or 2 desktops. But by looking ahead, looking at the emerging needs, you would have known, okay, we need to increase access to technology for students. And you might have had a vision that every child will one day have their own device, and maybe there'll be an online curriculum. But you can't see that far down the road. But think about how this BOCES, by always having that future in mind, was able to set the groundwork, those steps, to allow for a lot of technology integration, no matter what came along with technology. And then it went to establishing those pillars. So the BOCES worked with the components to begin to see, to the points that were made earlier, that if you can get a device in every child's hands, it will only go as far as that child unless you can work with the teachers in their professional learning. So the teachers will want to start to really use that technology. So your vision and mission surrounding the idea of looking ahead, looking at what's emerging, always keeps the BOCES in a pointed direction that eventually provides great support in the now, but sets up future support that is really going to be necessary. And that speaks to our work with our goals that we're going to be going toward. So, you know, this will be something we'll reflect on probably as we move through our virtual and then our retreat, to think about how we can, as an organization, and how you as a board can set the course of navigation for an organization to do this kind of work, which I just found to be exceptional. I did also want to point out a conversation. This came up in twofold. I was having a conversation with Mr. Boucher about preparing for the agenda, but he brought up a point regarding a campaign that's ongoing where 2 different legislators are talking about spectrum cable bills. And Steve was sharing with me his frustration that the focus was on the amount people are paying for their cable TV, when you have to consider that we have children right now who don't have internet connections because they live in these remote settings where you can't get cell phone service, so you can't connect to the internet via cell phone, and Spectrum or whatever organization doesn't run services out in those areas. Now imagine what that means. When you look at the steps of this building and you look at the pillars and you look at the roof, imagine the building being on an island that you can't swim to. And then when you look at all of the different access points that were made, you begin to get an idea of the role of digital equity. Some children, some communities, and some schools are impeded in digital access because they don't have internet connections. Think about the point Scott made about BOCES working with component school districts to purchase devices, because there are some school districts all across the state of New York who then maybe have an internet connection, but don't have the actual physical devices, the laptops on hand. Then think about equity from and access from the pillars that Chris talked about and the roof, because maybe a child has a device, but the teacher doesn't have the professional learning to be able to do much with the device because they don't have access to that. And then think about the experience of the children. So maybe the teacher has an idea of what to do and the child has the device, but they don't have the environment that would support them really using technology to create access. So when we think of digital access and we think of equity, there are multiple places and spaces within technology where access and equity become key issues. And I have to say that your component school districts, I think, are doing an outstanding job. I think they're leveraging and using BOCES in an appropriate way to benefit the districts and to benefit the students. And I think you as a board have set a great tone, and you've got great staff who look what they've put together to help support children in the region. So I wanted you to have this opportunity, and I'm so thankful to the Senior Council for all of their work and to all the staff at this organization to make things like this happen. And I was curious if there are any questions or thoughts from any board members. Steve.
I have to make sure. Is my mic on?
Your mic is on.
Oh, good. Just to the team, I have a big concern about access and how can, maybe you can come back with recommendations that what BOCES can do, what the board can do, and what our politicians can do, or what everybody can do to try to gain more access. I see the inequity in access with the internet, kind of like, it's like a school bus that picks some kids up, but doesn't pick others up. No matter how good your school is, the kid's not getting there because the school bus doesn't run to their house. It runs to the neighbor's house, maybe down the road, but doesn't run to your house. So future equity is really going to be focused around, in the past, the only thing people cared about is, I won't have internet. My kids won't be able to watch videos or listen to music. But now this is the vehicle we use to educate our children. This is as important as having a school bus that goes to every house. And so I just think we need to brainstorm, maybe even in our retreats or at other times, or get information from the staff here about what we can do, because obviously, you can make great inroads to providing the services through BOCES, but if somebody can't even get connected, that work is not going to be, it's not going to see its, the opportunity.
Steve, they say that Florida is behind educationally with everything. And in Florida, we do education by the counties, Collier County. And by the way, every board member gets paid. So, but they have begun to build this year in Collier County, just a few months ago, a virtual administrative building so that they can have all the resources for virtual learning in this one building, administrative offices, some kind of classrooms if there needs to be meetings, offices for the staff members. And they're really moving ahead with that concept of virtual K through 12.
I mean, I think that's fantastic, Elaine, because you see that for years, the quality of your education may depend on your zip code, okay? So if you live in the right area, you're going to get, because it might be more affluent, where the internet could finally be level the playing field. But now we're finding that it can't unless we get access to everybody, So I think that's great what they're doing down there.
Yeah, that's it, and it's very people are accepting it very well, and that's somewhat to the future. But I thought that the thought of a central building, really a place where virtual houses itself, takes care of people go to and is identified as the center, was a really good idea.
Perfect.
Gary Nelson, you had a question?
Yeah, I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to this, so I don't know the details or what it means. But I thought the state had a program going on that internet access had to be provided by the phone service. If you have a phone, you have internet access. And I don't know anything about it. And I was wondering if Scott knew, or am I crazy? The only thing I know is a couple months ago, I'm on rural telephone, who has a grant from the state to come in, and they upgraded my phone so that I could get internet over it. Did I lose everybody?
No.
Can anybody hear me?
Yep. I can hear you.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Gary, we can hear you. Let me put that in chat.
Okay, I just got a message that I got cut off by the host.
No, you're
Okay.
good. We can hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
But anyway, does anyone know anything about that program?
Scott, are you aware of anything about that in particular?
So in relation to telephone companies in general,
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that, Gary. I know DSL, right, was the primary vehicle that phone companies were trying to build out years ago. But I don't know of any state or federal program funding that expansion.
There is a, well, there was, I don't know the time frame, but I know it's over, where districts could order Khajiits, which what they are is they're a MiFi. And I know a lot of districts order them. I know we ordered 100 and we put them out into the areas and families who could not get service. We're still observing that program, but yeah, they gave us a special price and a yearly rate, not a monthly rate, to put the seats, that's what they're called, out in our communities. That's the only program that I know. Out in our community.
This sounded different. This sounded like a grant the state had to provide internet service to rural areas, which apparently I'm one of them. So again, I don't know. I think there's something out there though.
Well, we'll certainly look into it. I do know that for a time there were major industries who were providing free internet, to families. But I know that, locally where we can work with districts to get them those MiFi spots, we do. So if people can't access internet because of, let's say, device access, we can take care of that or help districts with that. It becomes more complicated when they're in places where internet's not available and cell phone service doesn't exist. And in terms of that, Steve, I think we'd have to look at advocacy. You might, the NISBA, the school board resolutions that we'll be reviewing later on, resolution 17 speaks to that exactly, that it talks about the digital divide and really supporting internet access so that all people across the state can have access to the internet. So, we'll
So
continue.
just to jump in, to your point, Russ, I get it. The Khajiit, that certainly was a nice offering. But what we've done, and Mr. Nelson, I think we've got over 3,500 MiFis out into districts right now. 2,500 of them into Utica alone. So I know that where there is access, right, we're providing that, schools are providing that device. It's where that cell tower doesn't exist, right? That last mile, people want to call it, that's still a challenge. And until we get companies to invest where they might not see the needed revenue, right, it's going to be a continued challenge. So I hope that legislators are fighting for that, because I believe that's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah. Gary Porcelli.
Couple of comments. First of all, Mr. Morris, I thought I read recently that AT&T is abandoning DSL. I don't know if it's just in this area or not, but they're going to discontinue it. And I'm getting notices on my phone about the advent of 5G, whatever that is. That's one side of the comment. In respect to the little house that was presented, in response to a question that Mr. Boucher raised at our last meeting, and it's a perennial one for this board. The plan we seem to be going on as an ancillary effect seems to be obviating the question of a common bell schedule. We seem to be able to get around that now. Thank you.
Here. Dr. Kilburn, can I make one more comment too about the internet?
Sure.
I did download the slide presentation from the New York School Boards Association. They did have a slide. They shared their slide presentation on September 25th, and they have data in there. So it's really telling. According to their surveys, 27% of the students said that when they surveyed students, 27% had inadequate high-speed connection, and 9% of teachers had inadequate high-speed connection. And then again, with students, 21% had insufficient devices, and teachers, only 3% had insufficient devices. But it would surprise that some did, maybe, but they did. But anyways, those are some high numbers, 21, 27% for connection and devices. So,
yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we can share that data. I can send you well, you probably have it, but the slide presentation is pretty interesting.
Actually, I wish that you would send it. Certainly, one of the things that we do, as you do as board members, promote advocacy and legislation, and we have your role in school boards, but also your role in SBI. As the superintendents have a cabinet where they put together legislative advocacy, and I think the digital divide is an important topic. So that would be helpful if you would send that forward.
I will.
Thank you. All right, so that is it for me and the district superintendent's report.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Can I
go ahead? I'm sorry.
Can I inject a comment?
No.
Focusing on just access to the internet is certainly important, but the other side of that equation is the home situation has to be able to make use of it. If there's no place at home, then it sort of cancels out the internet access. For a lot of kids in poverty, you just don't have an adequate place at home to receive instruction. So just something to think about.
Right.
It's an excellent point, and that's actually come up with remote instruction. So here we've been celebrating technology integration, and I do believe, and transformation, it should be celebrated. But Mike brings up a really relevant point that remote learning isn't working out for everyone, and that there are some limiters that are natural to remote learning, and there are environmental limiters. And I think Mike hits one right on the head, that if the home environment is not appropriate to support remote learning, then, as I said before, you can have a device in a child's hand, you can have the teacher who's willing to drive the instruction, you can have a rich and robust digital curriculum with all the bells and whistles, and yet learning might still be obstructed. So I think that was an excellent point, Mr. Moore. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good, thank you. Okay, so we move on to for the approval of the minutes of our regular meeting. So we need a motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting on September 9th, 2020. Can we get a motion to approve those?
I'll approve. Mike
Moore made a motion?
Yeah.
And it sounds like, is that Gary Nelson? It gives a second?
Yep, that's me.
Okay. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Thank you for that. Then we move on to, before we move on to the approval for the consent agenda, a consent agenda for B, C, and D, would someone like to make a motion to table policy 7201 to be discussed further at another date?
I'll make that motion too.
Mike will make the motion, and who'd like to second it?
I'll second.
I just want to check. I think that's policy 7102.
Oh, I have my dyslexic pen out today. I apologize. I'll write with the other hand. 7102.
Mine says
I apologize for that.
Oh, is it 7201? Hang on. I can do that quick.
7201.
It is 7201. It's me who's dyslexic today. Sorry about that. Thank you, Elaine.
Now you're messing with me. You can tell me things that I'm messing up. I'll just believe you. Like, okay, if you say so. All right, 7201. So any discussion on that? I think Dr. Kilburn explained her reasoning earlier. Okay, hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 All right, motion, the policy is tabled. So with that done, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda, B, C, and D. Can we get a
I'll make it.
made by John Salerno, the great John Salerno, and second by Mrs. Felbo?
Yes, that's fine.
Mr. Boucher,
Yes.
I have a question before we go further. Are we all okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Question for Dr. Kilburn. It's not an objection of any kind, but I'm looking on the personnel report on page 15. And the personnel report, page 15. And the gentleman that we are considering, the qualifications really seem to be over the top, particularly the last one under education. And the two questions I have are, number one, are we going to be able to hold on to this gentleman? And number two, is it possible we could use him elsewhere than as a TA? Thank you.
Excellent questions, and I'm going to use my power to defer this over to Mr. Hill.
Where is that? What page is it on?
15, you said?
There's still 15 for personnel.
There is,
There is.
but it's on page 119 of the packet. It's
Okay,
page 15 in the
119.
personnel section. Correct. Page 119.
The green page.
Let's take a moment for
Green
people to
page
get
is one.
there.
Oh, yeah, I know. 119.
And Mr. Hill.
So this young man, I believe, is looking at a change in career. So he was in a certain field, if he's looking to get into education, this is a good first step while he pursues that. So to the question of will we be able to hang on to him as a teacher's assistant? Probably not. But we may see, you know, him move up within the organization, assuming that he is a good employee, obviously. But I believe that the reason for this is a change in career.
He needs a job, and this is a good job to start with.
I believe he had a very good profession. He just didn't like the profession.
Didn't like it.
Kind of transitioning, wants to get in the world of education. This is a good first step. Allows him to pursue some things. Again, this is off the top of my head, but pretty sure that was the reasoning behind it.
Thank you. And it was not meant as an objection in any way. Thank you very much.
Question.
Okay, so we're in the discussion part of that motion, approving this motion. Are there any other questions or points of discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving that consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Then we move on to board topics. Dr. Kilburn, I think you talked about some of these, but you're back on.
So regarding the board retreat, we thought maybe it would be a nice idea to pull out some calendars and plan for a meeting in January to see what time board members might have available. Again, we've talked about the probability or possibility of in-person versus virtual. Certainly we will have to cross that bridge, but for now we should probably set a date.
Dr. Kilburn?
Yes, Tony.
Could I just add something about the retreat? I apologize. I think I was muted. I tried to get your attention earlier in your presentation.
Yeah.
Those of us that serve on our local boards, the month of January is when things, I mean, we don't get to making concrete decisions, but that's when our budget talks really take note in January and in February. And then until the state budget comes in April, nothing's finalized. But a lot of the issues that you talked about on what are going to be the needs of the local districts, is there any way that we could kind of move the retreat back a little bit or give us more time that we can relate to each other what the local concerns are? But if we're meeting in January and those concerns really haven't surfaced yet, we can't present them to the group. Just a item for thought.
No, so I want to make sure I'm understanding better because we had kind of two parts to this retreat. So are you thinking to take the thought exchange where people could start to conceptualize potential needs now and in the future and push that to a later date? Or were you thinking do that, but maybe take the other date when we reconvene and push that back?
We just need time. I think no matter how you look at it, I think the local school boards are going to need time to see what our real issues are come January and February. And that's when they really start to surface.
So maybe doing the thought exchange now would give us some great data. And then maybe would the board consider, should we push out the January date to maybe more towards February? Because when are the initial state aid runs? Is that mid-January, Tom? Do you remember when those typically come through?
It's not an election year for the governor, so I think he's got to have it. His proposal will be late January.
Okay.
And I think he's talking about having it earlier. Are you not, Tony?
I would say a little later, Mrs. Falvo, a little later.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Dr. Kilburn, it seems as though, because as I listen to the conversations, there's like parallel thoughts going on here. there's probably needs that we're going to have to provide for school districts, regardless of what budgets come in. And I think, I can't speak for Mr. Nicotera, but maybe he's thinking through a lens of like finances too, because if you're on a local school board, your number one concern usually is how are we going to pay for what we need to pay for.
Right.
So I don't know if there's a way to have like parallel discussions about, this is kind of where we see schools going and how we need to support them. And then in addition to that, somewhere along the way, we need to make sure we need to know how to finance this, because as I'm listening to Mr. Nicotera, it sounds like those discussions are going to really be focused around how do we help pay for a lot of this stuff, of which we may be premature. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm doing it right.
I think I might have an idea that could help. We'll do the first phase is the thought exchange. That'll help us gather data and perspectives. We can spend some time in, let's say, January, going over that and starting to flesh out the goals. We'll really be asking the board to set priorities, kind of set the course like we talked about with technology. We could then, typically the board would then direct the administrators based on your course to put some potential goals in place. And what we could do is report that back to the board and share that out with the components to see what they think of that direction and those proposed goals. That might be an option because, to Tony's point, by that time, the boards will definitely know where they are in the now and have a better idea of where their future is. And they might come back and say, yep, you're right on track, BOCES, or they might come back and say, actually, can you consider this? This wasn't on the platform at all. So we could do a feedback cycle. So you wouldn't necessarily adopt any goals until you got the returns of the feedback cycle to see if you were in the right place.
I appreciate it.
He makes a good point. I mean, the schools are our customers, and we need to know, we need to really get as much feedback from them as we can to know what they want. But if we did it in stages, you probably could accomplish that.
I think we could. Ann, are you still with us? Where are you? There you are, Ann Turner. What do you think? You're muted. I don't know if you know that.
No, I didn't know it. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, it's certainly doable. Meets the needs of districts maybe a little bit better.
Yeah, I think so.
Discussion for phase 3. Yeah.
All right, so I'd say let's move forward with a date in January to meet and flesh out some ideas. And then, Tony, to your point, what we'll do is we'll add a feedback cycle. So the boards will have an opportunity, components will have an opportunity to respond to what we think is the right direction and see where we go from there.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So with that in mind, everybody take out either your smartphones, your calendars, your date books, whatever you have on hand, and let's look at January. So this would probably be a day thing, like we might want to break it up, like maybe choose a Saturday or something. So you might be able to work during a day versus an evening. But I'd like to just check, is that a preference? Do I hear any people who are against a Saturday and would prefer a weeknight? Okay, I'm not hearing any objections to Saturday. So let's look at some Saturdays in January. We have January 8. No, I mean January 9. I'm already looking at Fridays. January 9. Does that work for everybody?
I mean, will people be away? I think that's a break. Is that is that too close to the first? It will be people. So let's say I'm, if I go to, not me, but if somebody goes to North Carolina, because that's when their kid, I mean, I don't know.
And then they have to quarantine.
Yeah.
Right. So
towards the 23rd or whatever.
Maybe.
Okay. So January 23, that might get people through a quarantine if needed.
Yeah.
Right. Or how are we feeling? I'm feeling this way. If you're feeling this way, please put your thumbs up.
I'm tentative in January. That's full of family birthdays, and we're usually traveling on the weekends.
Okay, so the weekends in January might not work for you, Mike? Okay.
It probably won't, but don't let that stop you. Wherever I am, I might be able to.
Sure, if it's virtual.
Okay, so I'm not hearing objections to January 23. So let's initially move to January 23. And we'll schedule out like 8 to 3. I don't know that we'll take that long, but we'll just please hold that time so we can flesh out that retreat.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Okay. Steve, do you want to go on to the next section, or do you want me to kind of go right into the bylaws?
Well, did we, wait a minute, you need to talk about proposing the bylaws and amendments?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, that's what I was asking about. Okay, so if you go to the back of your packet, there were like 22 or 27, I think, different resolutions proposed by school boards regarding various proposals. And what I think we might want to do, because it's trying to coordinate this through Zoom, is I will just read the resolution recommendation briefly. It's like a 1-sentence read, and ask if people object to the recommendation made by school boards. If we have an objection, we can have some discussion. If there's no objection, you would be proposing it go forward as recommended. I'm hoping that sounds like a good process, and we'll start. So resolution 1 proposes that school boards advocate for the overhaul of the current New York State testing program, seeing that it's not adequate, doesn't provide people access to scores on time, doesn't allow district personnel to review test content materials and related scores. Is there anyone who objects to that recommendation or would like to make a point on it? Okay, moving on to recommendation number 2. Recommendation number 2 supports that the school boards shall support legislation that makes it easier for districts to recover attorneys' fees in legal cases related to special education, where the district is the prevailing party. So the district has won the case, make it easier for them to recoup fees related to that. Any opposition or discussion regarding that recommendation? Hearing none, going on to recommendation 3. Also in the same area, it's requesting that the association support legislation that would shift the burden of proof in special education due process complaints away from the district and on to the party seeking relief. And
I don't know enough about that to object. I mean, I would have to rely on you folks. I mean,
I
does
can
that sound
provide
reasonable?
I can provide some background on that. So actually, Dr. Belair at Whitesboro wrote this proposed resolution, and Morrisville Eaton is sponsoring it. Right now, in cases where, let's say a petitioner, let's say a parent wants to, maybe has a case that their child is not receiving free and appropriate public education, the needs of their child's IEP are not being met. They could petition for a hearing and a due process. That involves attorneys and other fees. And the burden of proof is placed on the district to prove they've done everything they can. It's a very onerous proof. And the petitioner doesn't have to necessarily face any legal expenses associated with ultimately losing that particular case. That's created a bit of a window for, unfortunately, some opportunists in law who work with families to create cases, because it creates a revenue stream for that particular attorney and potentially for the school, for those particular persons involved, because again, it's very onerous for a school district to prove they've done everything. Or it's kind of like asking people to prove what they haven't done, right? It's that kind of question. Now, across the country, the federal standard is that the burden of proof is placed upon the petitioner. But in New York State, that was switched and it's placed upon the school district. I think with good intention, because we might have families who feel overwhelmed by that or feel like they can't afford the legal counsel. However, it has created a bit of a monster in terms of hearings and related costs to school districts and a burden to the state system itself regarding impartial hearing officers. And that is why that legislation is there. Well, the proposal is there.
To me, it seems to make sense, but I mean, I try to look at the both sides of everything. I imagine a lot of the people, if they don't think their child is getting the proper, they're not getting what they're supposed to be getting from their IEP or what have you, they may be a family that doesn't have the means to start with. I know I'm stereotyping, I want you all to forgive me for this, but but they do get a hearing though, right? If I'm a poor family and I don't think my kid's getting their due, I can come and get a hearing at the school, right?
Yeah, I mean, the process still exists. The due process hearings still exist. However, if the party seeking relief were not to win the case, they would ultimately be responsible for the costs of their attorneys, right? Versus right now, if the party seeking relief does not win the case, the school district still bears the cost, the burden of those expenses.
Right.
And Steve, this has really become a problem with a particular lawyer. And he solicits, with advertisement to families with IEPs that are you getting everything that you're entitled to? So he's doing it for self-gain. This has been going on. Morrisville Eaton took a huge hit, and they're not the only local district. This guy's local, Steve, and it's just a matter of time before that he may come to your district and start to steer the pot. It's so I wholeheartedly agree with the legislation or the resolution.
All right, this makes sense. Thank you for that.
So hearing no other points, I think we'll move forward with the resolution as proposed by school boards and move on to resolution 4, which is that school boards seek legislative and/or policy changes that would mandate that local industrial development agencies have to include schools that would be affected by pilot agreements. So in essence, to be brief, if a new business comes into town, we can provide some tax breaks can be provided to that new business, and an industrial development agency has to kind of factor in how many jobs will this company bring in, and to what degree do we want to kind of give them a break in taxes because it'll better the economy, better the town. That can have a negative impact on school districts who rely on tax revenue. And so what happens is these IDAs set up the pilot agreement. They're like, instead of paying taxes, pay us this much money. And then they tell the schools, this is what we came up with. And the schools want to be involved in that process sooner because it does affect revenue coming into the schools. So any questions or points about that particular proposed resolution?
The only point that I'm going to make on this is it says in the development of, but pilots are extended also.
Correct.
And it doesn't address the extension of pilots, which hopefully when we get to the meeting, we can add that to the resolution. But yeah, we're not at the table, so we need to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all going to be seeing these pilots though, because right now, from the county level, as a county legislator, I've been going to meetings lately in Boonville and Forestport and other areas. Rome has a lot of the projects going on. There's a lot of solar projects going on right now in Oneida County, and the solar companies are going to and brokering deals. They're sending out letters. If you don't respond to the letter quickly enough, you fall into a category where you may not be able to benefit from the taxes or any pilot programs. So it's really tricky, and you have to have your business managers and your lawyers pay quick attention to that. If they get a letter from a solar company or IDA saying that there's a project coming to your area, because if you don't handle it correctly, you won't be able to benefit. So it is.
You're 100% right. That just happened in my district, and the letter that they send out does not have a reply. It's a general letter that you wouldn't even notice. You probably throw it out, and the villages and the districts in my area filed a lawsuit, and they sat at the table trying to fix the problem. But you're 100% correct.
I will add that New York Mills has been particularly burned by these things a few times. And in reference to this letter, sometimes it only goes to the superintendent and the board's not even aware of it unless the superintendent makes them aware. And you can ask questions as an afterthought, but you don't have any say. They simply tell you, oh, that's nice, and we're going to do this anyways.
Right. I got an email this week from the IDA from Edge in Rome, and Shauna out at Edge, executive director of the IDA, and she's warning. She said, warn your communities that they'll get letters and that they need to respond to those because they need to make sure they're not opting out of. It's called 487. So I'll send Dr. Kilburn. I'll send you the information I have. But all the school districts have to know about it because it's part of the taxing jurisdiction. And my experience has been with the one up in Boonville and Forestport, the solar companies pit the local government against the school and against the county, against each other, trying to broker the best deal because they convince because of the way the taxes are in most communities, a school tax bill is higher than the county and the county's higher than the town. So when they split up an opportunity from a pilot, a lot of times the town who's originally brokering the deal gets the least amount of benefit. And so these companies are pitting the towns against the county and the schools. So it's a mess. So they really you gotta get it in the hands of your business officials and lawyers as soon as you get it.
So this proposed resolution would help ensure that districts play a role in the development of the pilot agreements, which could be beneficial.
Yeah.
And then stop maybe the sly letter campaign, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, do we hear any other points on that matter?
One addition, Mr. Stewart's point about the extension of these things. They'll get a 10-year and then it'll be renewed and it goes on for almost ad infinitum. I know that happened in Rome.
Yes. Now, our delegate could make a motion, correct, to amend this resolution to incorporate also extensions to
Extensions,
the
yes.
pilot agreement.
Yeah,
So
if the board gives direction to Mike to do that, yes.
we do also have to speak of that, but I'll come back to that. Deb, don't let me forget. And Mr. Moore, please don't let me forget. We might have to talk about an alternate. Okay, so would you like then to go forward with the recommendation that the delegate make the motion to propose an extension to incorporate language to include school district involvement in the decision to extend pilot agreements on this particular resolution? Elaine is for it. She nodded her head. Steve's got a good number going on there.
Yes.
More. Russ is for it. All right.
Yes.
That's going to happen.
We just need to write that up. And
Deb, are you writing that up? Deb is writing it down. I can see her writing it down. So she will write that up for us. Wonderful.
Well, somebody has to write the addendum to the resolution.
Okay, moving on to number 5, resolution number 5. So this is proposing that school boards support legislation that would allow and enhance the sharing of services among school districts and other municipalities. Not hearing any objections to that.
Well, that's already established, especially with counties.
Yes. So we will continue.
No objections.
No objections moving forward. Proposed resolution number 6, that school boards support proposals to expand opportunities and capacity for online learning. Pointing out that many rural districts struggle to provide competitive course offerings. This really speaks to the presentation you just heard earlier today.
Right.
Not hearing objections to that. So we'll move on to 7, proposed resolution that school board should adopt proposals to incorporate pre-K funding into their state aid formulas. I don't hear any objections to that.
Why would there be?
Yeah, I would agree. Why would there be? But you never know. Proposed resolution number 8, that school boards oppose proposals to raise the number of charter schools authorized in a state. So here in the state of New York. Any objections to opposing an increase to the number of charter schools? No objections. Moving on to resolution number 9, that school board association should oppose proposals to expand mayoral control to school districts beyond New York City. I'm not hearing any objections to that. Moving on, proposal number 10, that school boards support proposals to regulate and restrict the use of tobacco products among youth. Any opposers? I'm thinking not. Moving on to proposal 11, that the association seek legislative support to allow for more than one board member to simultaneously attend a New York State Office of the Comptroller's Audit Exit Conference. I do think this is important. So for example, we just went through our comptroller's audit. They'll usually ask the board president to come in, but you also have a chairperson of the audit committee. There's others this might be beneficial to, and certainly I think we can work with the comptroller's office to make sure a quorum is not present. Any objections to that proposal? Hearing none. Moving on. Yes.
Dr. Kilburn, if we could go back just for a second to Resolution 10. I just need some information. The resolution reads tobacco products. Are there, not being in the market, are there some things that are included in vaping that are non-tobacco but are still used in that sense? For example, maybe some of the oils and things like that. I don't know if it needs to be added to beyond tobacco. That's the question.
Well, you know, it's interesting. It does talk in here to protect our children from a lifetime of nicotine addiction and poor health, but it doesn't go beyond tobacco products. Yeah, certainly. I mean, the vape pens that everybody talks about also carry marijuana or synthetics, you know, based on, so certainly this could be expanded upon to talk about other types of substances.
I think that would muddy it at this point. I think it's very clear with the tobacco. And if in the future we need to do something, we can do it. You're just going to have conversation on that floor for a long time, unless we have some backup information that it's this and this and this.
I do wonder that this particularly talks about the tobacco industry. So I wonder from a legislative and from an advocacy point of group, if they're trying to target the tobacco industry and just push this through.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Wouldn't marijuana and synthetics fall under the drug category? Wouldn't they cover that under another category?
Yes, I mean,
Yes.
certainly they are. They're all considered drugs. Even nicotine, I think, is under that envelope now.
Right, but they would specifically bring that out because it's such a problem. Maybe it would fall in, you know, marijuana, synthetics, and opioids. Maybe they group that in an entire different resolution.
Yeah. Yep. I suppose that's possible. So we have a thought on the floor is, can we incorporate some of the other language about other products outside of tobacco that have some of those same negative effects, or do we move forward with it as is?
Keep in mind,
I might suggest that perhaps when this comes before the group, our delegate just keep an ear and see what comes out of it. That's the only thing.
Okay.
and also make a point, if my mic's on, that we're not legislating here. We're just asking the school board association to lobby. So that could be as wide or as narrow as we want, and they could lobby it any way they want.
Good point.
Mike, could we ask for an exemption to that rule for kids from Remsen that play baseball or work on a farm? I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I thought that was already in place.
Isn't it, Ann?
Funny guy.
I'm going to move back now to Resolution 12, which talks about that the association support legislation that makes it clear that public school districts are not responsible for assessing the substantial equivalency of education delivered in non-public schools. Specifically, they point to instead using BOCES and using state ed for that purpose. So regarding substantial equivalency, for example, in our region, we have honors schools. And under the rules of substantial equivalency, and New York State is still working on the parameters and procedures about that, it might require a local school district superintendent to have to knock on the door of an Amish schoolhouse and say, hey, what's going on in there? And they're asking instead that this be deferred over to state ed or BOCES. I think that's certainly understandable when we consider everything already on the plate of superintendents. Does anybody have any points or questions about that particular?
I just said I vote for state.
That'll end up being me. Here I go. I'll get on my horse and buggy right now.
I think it ought to be
Easy.
a closer that they can buy.
I missed Mr. Moore's comment. I feel badly.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking that the private schools can buy a closer service, and we could do that for them.
Most private schools don't fall under this so much because they tend to get accreditation, or they use New York State Regents or other assessments that allow them to have more substantial equivalency. This typically comes up with Jewish yeshivas. So downstate, you'll see that, or in areas with Jewish populations that have yeshivas. And the Amish is another example of schools that kind of exist outside of public and parochial settings in the state. Okay. Go ahead. Mike, I missed you.
Good enough for me. That's
All right.
good.
Moving beyond resolution 12, we're on to 13, which is school board supporting legislation to authorize bi-directional communication between New York school districts and the New York State Immunization Information System. So right now, school nurses, when they need to pull immunization records, have to do this manually, download each student at a time. If they had interchangeable interconnectivity, it would be much easier for the school nurses. This takes the first 2 weeks of school. It eats up a lot of time for nurses with immunization records. Were there any questions about this particular resolution? Okay, not hearing any. Going on to 14. Association supports legislation that would enable the Commissioner of Education to declare alternate election arrangements in cases where a disaster substantially interrupts a scheduled school board budget vote. There's a massive microburst or tornado lands, literally, like act of God in the middle of a planned budget vote. Okay, moving to, I'm hearing that that's okay. We're moving to number 15. Associations seek to support legislation that would provide for training and certification for professional parent advocates to attend Committee on Special Education meetings and hearings. The legislation goes on to point out that parent advocates at times where they are supposed to be taking a supportive role to help link the parents to the services they need to understand the IEP in the school districts and how to connect it all, will sometimes come in with a very adversarial approach, almost asserting parents' rights, but pushing against school districts and not taking on their intended role. So this is asking for required training and certification for those parent advocates. Any questions about that proposed resolution? Hearing none, moving on to 16. This is to support legislation that promotes the reduction in costs associated with an impartial hearing, independent evaluation requests, and attorney fees associated with due process claims. So there's a lot of records and fees that can come up in these claims. And it eats up tremendous amounts of time for school districts and costs a tremendous amount of money. And this is proposing that this be streamlined for hearing requests, evaluations, and settlements, doctor bills, et cetera. Any thoughts about that? Not hearing any. Moving on to resolution 17. School Boards Association support increased state and federal funding to provide educational equity by addressing the digital divide created by limited access to technology and broadband. That's the internet. Any objections? Hearing none. Moving on to 18. Suggesting that the School Boards Association oppose mid-year state aid cuts to allow for educational continuity and fiscal stability. Anyone want to oppose that? Thinking not. Nobody wants the cuts. Resolution 19. It's talking about school boards producing and widely recommending adoption of board policy language or language added to existing policy related to child abuse, stating that the district will encourage and facilitate all school personnel, including those who are mandated reporters, and those who are not, to participate once every 3 years in a course workshop presents information related to the signs of child abuse and the responsibilities of reporting them. Are there any objections? Hearing none. Oh, Gary Nelson, you have a question? Or
Yeah. No. The question, of course, is who is paying for this? One, and there's a couple others later on that seem almost like the identical proposal, but they're opposed to it. Did I lose you again?
No, you're on.
Can you hear me?
On audio.
because we were losing your voice. So when I shut your camera off,
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can hear you. So the point had to
Yeah, okay.
And the seemingly identical policies recommendations later on, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed the same thing in this rationale. It does talk about how some of it they see being able to be done at little to no additional cost to schools. For example, there are already mandated reporters who could be helping train each other and train other staff during staff meetings, for example, versus like an additional certification requirement. So where in the other policy, I think it's like the very last one at the end, they opposed it based on sustainability. In this policy, they incorporate that they think it is sustainable because it would be free and done basically in the school year or within existing.
I can't imagine how it's being done free.
Well, right. I guess, one way that might work would be if I was a principal and I had staff meetings, I might incorporate 10 minutes or have 10 minutes for every meeting to just review quickly signs of child abuse and neglect, or to show a short video, or maybe push out via emails videos to people that they would watch and indicate they watched. And those could be short snippets over time versus having to sit down and have a full training at any one time.
The second issue I have is it's narrowly focused. I mean, I can think of a dozen other issues that are equally important to be educated about, with, sexual equity, racial sensitivity, LGBTQ training. I mean, there's a whole list here that we're focused on child abuse, where we're all designated, obligated reporters anyway. I'm just thinking we're walking into a quagmire.
Any other thoughts about Gary's contribution? Gary, would you recommend a change to this, or would you want this motion to go through, but then maybe they should be considering additional resolutions?
I'm just concerned about it. That there's a quagmire out there that you're taking your first step into.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I haven't heard that. Are there any other thoughts, or does the board want to move forward with the recommendation as it stands?
Just a note, if anybody wants to change it, it's best to get the changes in early. There's some deadline involved with changes that can be made on the before the meeting starts.
Yes, you're right, Mike. But you still can do it on the floor. So there is a deadline to amending the resolutions, but again, they have to give you the right to do it on the floor also.
Well, if you're serious about a change, you got to do the preliminary work and get it in ahead of time. Otherwise, it'll just open up a lot of discussion and if we're serious about it, if it's something that we really feel strongly about, then we should prepare for it. If not, if we're just going to bring it up on the floor, it's really not going to go anywhere.
No, you're right, Elaine. I mean, we need to prepare.
Let's pick our issues and be strong with them, prepare them.
Agreed. Yeah.
I'm just simply opposed to doing it. But it sounds horrible. It's like one of those things you're opposed to defibrillators,
Yeah, well,
That's great. It's a wonderful thing, but boy, does it have a lot of repercussions. And I think this one is one of those.
Excellent analogy, Gary. Okay, so at this time, I'm not hearing from the board modification or a no to this. So I think
you go ahead.
Go through as is. The next section had to do with where school boards opposes a series of resolutions, asking you to consider whether you want to share in their position. Do you want me to go through those one at a time, or do you want to just ask any questions about any particular one, or you want to discuss school board's stance on those? No preference.
All together.
All together. So
Altogether, yes, please.
okay, so I think on these, for anybody who has any oppositions on resolution 20 through 27 proposed by the school boards.
Now, those districts who propose these can also bring them back up on the floor. And if they get a 2/3 vote, they can be voted on. But just the resolution committee didn't approve them. So.
Okay. So I believe, Mr. Boucher, we are done going through these resolutions.
Okay, well, very, very good. Thank you very much for that. Now we move on to number 9, old business. I see none. Is that still the case?
That is still the case.
Okay. And then we go on to executive session, but I don't see anything. Do we have anything? No, nothing there. So then we move on to the next part, which is adjournment. So we need a motion.
No, we need to deal with the person who's going to be the voting
Yes.
delegate.
Thank you.
Good call.
So,
All right,
Mr.
let's have that
Moore-
discussion.
Yep. So, Mr. Moore, you indicated to us that you may not be available. You might be, but you might not be available to be the delegate for this meeting for some pretty good reasons. So I'm wondering if there's anybody else who would be willing to participate in that virtual meeting. Yvonne would be happy to step up.
She's done it before. Good girl.
There is a process we have to go through with school boards. So I would just ask Mr. Moore, as we get closer to the date, if let's say by October 21, if you could let us know if you'll be able to serve, and if not, we will reach out to Yvonne to have her step in.
I can tell you that by October 21, I won't know.
Oh,
because this operation is on the 19th, and it will be 8 days before they open the eye up to see if there's anything in there.
got you. Deb, was there a deadline, or would they be able to support a last minute change?
As far as the voting delegate, I think it is the 21st.
But as long as there's an alternate named,
Fine. Okay.
you should be fine. But if you want to give NISBA a call tomorrow and let them know the situation, they'll tell you.
Wonderful. So
I will
we'll
do that.
If you could reach out to school boards tomorrow. And Mr. Moore, I hope that you're going to be healthy and happy and things are going to work out well.
I'll keep an eye on it.
Be well.
Be well. All right. So now, Mr. Boucher, I think you can go towards adjournment.
Okay, thank you. We need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I want to stay.
Moved by Russ and second by
Yvonne.
Yvonne.
Thank you, Yvonne. Okay, everybody. Motion, meeting adjourned then. Everybody have a great night.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
Steve.
Steve.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. Kilburn. Thank you, everybody else.